Rabbi Yaakov is about to start a story, and all of a sudden his memory is wiped clean. He can't remember even one story. He doesn't know what's going on. It's never happened to him before. He literally spent hours of his life, days of his life with the Baal Shem Tov. And as he finishes the story, this Pinchas, he sees he's very, very happy, and he starts to cry. He starts to weep like a child, but out of happiness. Welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. This week's story is about the Baal Shem Tov, but it starts at the moment the Baal Shem Tov is about to pass away. The Baal Shem Tov, before he passed away, he called all of his Talmidim together, and he gave each of them instructions as to what they should do after he passes on, what their mission in life should be. And most people, he gives them something pretty prestigious to do. And then he had one student, one Talmud whose name was Rabbi Yaakov, and he told him that his job was to tell stories of the Baal Shem Tov. He was one of the closest Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov, and therefore he was around when many of the most amazing things of the Baal Shem Tov happened. And so Baal Shem Tov tells him, this is going to be your job. You're going to go around from town to town, and you're going to say stories of the Baal Shem Tov. Now, in those days, to hear a story of the Baal Shem Tov, it wasn't a simple thing, because you couldn't, right? Then everything was by word of mouth or by message, so it was a very rare thing, and therefore it was a way to make a living. But Rabbi Yaakov wasn't sure why this was his lot with his stories. But of course, you listen to your Rebbe, and so he started to do this. He went from town to town. In one of the towns that he ended up in, he heard that there was a very rich man. The way I heard the story, his name was Reb Pinchas. I don't know if that's necessarily his name, but he heard that this Reb Pinchas gives a golden coin to whoever could tell him the story of the Baal Shem Tov. And so he goes to this Reb Pinchas. Reb Pinchas says, I want you to say the story on Friday night in my house. And he announces to everybody in the shul, and he lets it, the word goes around. He's going to be a special storyteller, one of the Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov, who's going to say a story. So a bunch of people, the house was very crowded. Everyone wanted to hear their story. And they eat, and sometime at the middle of the meal or after the meal, the Balabas, this Reb Pinchas, presents Rabbi Yaakov and says, now he's gonna say the story of the Baal Shem Tov. And Rabbi Yaakov is about to start a story, and all of a sudden his memory of any story of the Baal Shem Tov is wiped clean. He can't remember even one story. So he mumbles an apology. He doesn't know what's going on. It's never happened to him before. He literally spent hours of his life, days of his life with the Baal Shem Tov. So the Balabas was, he didn't even show any sign of anger, and he said, okay, our guest is probably very tired. Come back tomorrow for the meal. And a bunch of people were, wondering if this guy is even a real Talmud of Baal Shem Tov. Maybe he's an imposter. This guy says he lived his whole life Baal Shem Tov. He can't remember one story. Fine. People come back the next day. It was less of a crowd than the night before, but there's still a lot of people. And again, the same thing happens. He presents him, say a story at a certain point, and he's about to say a story and can't remember anything. And Reb Pinchas again was very patient, and he said he for sure had a very long and arduous week. Let's come back for Shalosh. And now more people were like, okay, this guy's an imposter. And Rabbi Yaakov is so embarrassed. He doesn't know what's going on. He can't, and he starts to think to himself, maybe the Baal Shem Tov, I forgot to say a detail, the Baal Shem Tov told him, you'll know when you have to stop saying stories. It'll be clear to you. So he said, maybe this is the sign. Maybe if I forget all the stories, this is the sign the Baal Shem Tov is talking about, that I should stop telling stories. Anyway, they come back for Shalosh. People come back, and it's even less of a crowd. Some hopeful, optimistic people come. And once again, the same thing repeats itself. He can't remember a story. And he's so pained and perturbed by this. And the Balabas asks him, not to give up and to try. And he even stays there for another 2 days. Well, Balabas asked him, Pinchas asked him to, keep on staying just in case, and he couldn't remember. On the day as he's getting, 2 days later, as he's getting ready to leave, all of a sudden he remembers one story. He runs as fast as he could to Reb Pinchas and says, Reb Pinchas, I remembered a story. So Reb Pinchas right away, brings him into his private study and says, tell me the story. And he says like this: one Motzei Shabbos, as many Baal Shem Tov stories go, I think it was Motzei Shabbos, could be it wasn't that, but I believe it was though. We got into the wagon. The Baal Shem Tov said we're going somewhere, and as was customary, when we went into the wagon, the horses took off, and it felt as if we were flying through the air, and we quickly got to a certain town. And we go through the town to a certain place which looked to be the Jewish ghetto, and we knocked on one of the doors over there, and it looked like a ghost town. Nobody's outside. All the doors were shut. We knock on the door, and somebody unlocks the door and carefully peeps out of the door and sees Yidden. He says, "Come in quickly." They come in, and he tells the Baal Shem Tov and his Talmidim that there's tonight is a night when the bishop's going to give his fiery sermon, his hate-filled speech against the Jews. He's going to incite a lot of violence against Jews, and so we're staying inside and hoping that no one's going to bother us. We're remaining out of sight. And so, you came here on the wrong night, but at least stay here. Don't go out. But the Baal Shem Tov had other plans. Rabbi Yaakov says. He called over to me and he said, "I want you to go over to the priest, to this bishop, and you need to tell him the Baal Shem Tov is calling him over, and to come right away." And the owner of the home says, "You're crazy. You're sending him to his death. What are you doing? You're gonna bring problems on us." And Baal Shem Tov looks at him and says, I don't know what he says. He made it clear that he knows what he's talking about. And I, Rabbi Yaakov, even though I was scared, I knew the Baal Shem Tov, I'm following his orders, nothing bad will happen to me. And so I went through the crowds who listened to the sermon. Nobody even looked at me. Nobody paid attention to me, as if I wasn't there. I went straight up to the bishop and I tell him what the Baal Shem Tov says. And he was caught off guard. And after a moment, he regained his composure and he says, "Okay, I'll come after my sermon." So I go back to the Baal Shem Tov, I tell the Baal Shem Tov what he said, and the Baal Shem Tov says, "No, go back and tell him he has to come now, or it will be too late." That's what he said. So he goes back, and once again, nobody looks at him as if he's not there. Absolute miracle. And he tells this to the bishop, and the bishop excuses himself and comes right after him and goes into the house. And he sees the Baal Shem Tov, and right away, he starts to cry. And the Baal Shem Tov brings him into a side room, and was in there with him for hours. And afterwards, after they came out, this bishop ran away. He ran quickly, and he was never heard from again in that town. And more than this, what happened in that room, we don't know. And we don't know what happened after that. And as he finishes the story, this Pinchas, he sees he's very, very happy, and he starts to cry. He starts to weep like a child, but out of happiness. And after he calms down, Pinchas tells him, "Let me tell you the rest of that story. I was that bishop, and I grew up, from parents. I grew up, with God-fearing parents, but they passed away when I was very young, and I fell in with the wrong crowd, and eventually." Ended up with the combination of my talents and where I was in life. I, ended up in the church, and they promised me a lot of material wealth and material good, and I went after it, and to the point where I got promoted to becoming, from one level to the next level, I became a bishop in this town. And I, for whatever reason, for whatever personal gains, I started to even incite hate against Jewish people. And the Baal Shem Tov, he told, I don't remember. Once when I heard the story, I read the story in different locations, different sources, and some places say there were letters going between Baal Shem Tov and him for a long time. He wanted to come back. Pinchas wanted to come back, but he didn't know how. He wasn't ready yet. Or there were dreams, his father. But either way, he kept on pushing off his, doing tshuva until that night. The Baal Shem Tov gave him a directive. The Baal Shem Tov gave him a directive how to do tshuva, and he told him that when my student comes and tells you this story, that's when you're going to know that your teshuva was accepted fully, right? That you were fully, your teshuva was fully accepted. So Pinchas tells Rabbi Yaakov, when I saw you, I knew that it was time. I knew that this was a chance. And when you forgot the story every single time, I knew that it wasn't a problem with you, it was a problem with me. I didn't do full tshuva yet. And for the next few nights, I cried and I did as much tshuva as I could. And therefore, the past few nights, I kept on, just doing as much tshuva and really calling out to Hashem in the depths of my soul. And finally, this morning you remembered, and so now I know that my tshuva is accepted. So, and that was, he gave Rabbi Yaakov a very big sum of money, and he was able to stop, running around and, wandering and telling stories, and he was able to live out the rest of his life very happily. And this is a story of Rabbi Yaakov, the storyteller, the Baal Shem Tov, and the Baal Tshuva. May we all be able to do the tshuva we're supposed to. As we know, tshuva is not just repenting on sins, but it's coming closer and closer to Hashem. May we all merit to do it every single day of our lives and be able to merit the ultimate tshuva, which is, Mashiach, and we reunited with Hashem, our King. And good Tvach, thank you for watching. Like and subscribe.
And this is a Hakel.
This is a Hakel.